The first time my son invited me to dinner with his wife's family, I could already feel what they thought of me before we even met. The pauses in his voice, the way he said maybe wear something nice, like the word nice had rules I didn't know. I looked around my small house, the one my late husband and I built with our hands, and smiled. If they wanted to see a poor, simple mother, I could give them exactly that. Sometimes silence says more than pride ever could. That night I put on my old gray dress, the one with the loose button I never fixed. I didn't wear jewelry. I didn't need it. Because what they didn't know was, this dinner wasn't about money. It was about respect. Before we begin this story, take a moment to join our Family Shadows community. Subscribe, give this video a like, and share it with someone who still believes quiet grace can be powerful. And as you listen, tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged for being too simple? Now let's start. The late sun was sliding behind the moss trees when the phone rang. Evelyn wiped her hands on a towel. They were still stained with varnish from fixing her old piano bench. The number on the screen made her heart warm. Her son. She answered with a smile in her voice. Hey David. Hey Mom. His tone had that mix of love and hesitation she'd come to recognize. So, Isabella's parents invited us to dinner this Saturday. They'd love to meet you. That's sweet, she said, setting her cup of tea down. Where at? Downtown. That new French place everyone talks about. Oh, she chuckled softly. Fancy. Yep. There was a pause, then he added, maybe wear something nice, okay? The words sat heavy between them. Evelyn didn't respond right away. She looked down at her hands again, the small cracks, the bit of polish stuck under her nails from years of music and repair. Something nice? She repeated gently. You mean something that hides who I am? David's voice faltered. No, Mom, that's not what I meant. Just they're particular. I just don't want you to feel out of place. She smiled to herself, even though he couldn't see it. Out of place? Punny, I've been out of place all my life and still managed to play the right notes. Mom, he exhaled, the sound full of guilt and love tangled together. Just please. For me. All right, she said softly. For you. When she hung up, the house fell quiet except for the old clock ticking on the shelf and the faint creak of the floorboards. She sat at the table, staring out through the lace curtains. The trees outside swayed gently, the Spanish moss dancing in the humid air of Savannah. The light caught the dust motes, turning them gold for a moment before they faded again. She poured herself another cup of tea, her favorite jasmine blend. The steam curled upward, the scent calming her heart. Maybe wear something nice, she whispered to herself with a half-smile, as if decency could be sewn into fabric. Her eyes drifted around the room. The worn books, the faded photos, the upright piano she bought second-hand 30 years ago. Every object had its story, every scratch a memory. She didn't have much, but she had things that had lasted. In her world, that was wealth enough. She stood, moved to her small bedroom, and opened the old wooden wardrobe. The hinges squeaked in protest. Inside hung a handful of dresses, pressed neatly but old. The colors faded from years of sunlight. She brushed her fingers across the fabrics until she reached a gray one, soft from age. This one'll do, she murmured. It was the same dress she'd worn when she retired. The day the choir surprised her with a cake and the kids sang You Raise Me Up. Back then she'd cried because she didn't feel poor. She felt full. Full of life, full of purpose, full of sound. Now the silence of her home echoed louder than any applause. As she laid the dress on her bed, her phone buzzed again, this time a text from David. Mom, thank you. Don't overthink it. Just be yourself. Love you. She smiled. Be myself, she thought. That's all I've ever been. Evelyn turned toward her small dresser and caught her reflection in the mirror. Time had softened her face, but her eyes still carried that warm, determined spark, the kind that years of music never dimmed. She leaned closer, studying the faint lines near her mouth. Each one told a story she wouldn't erase. She picked up a little bottle of perfume, cheap but familiar. The lavender scent her late husband used to love. She dabbed a little on her wrist and whispered, "For you, Henry. They'll never know how rich we were in music." The kettle whistled from the kitchen, breaking her thoughts. She returned, refilled her cup, and sat again by the window. The world outside glowed in the dimming light. Children riding bikes, someone walking their dog, a neighbor waving from her porch. Everyday beauty. Quiet, humble, but honest. She thought about Isabella's parents, the Davenports. She'd seen their kind before. Polished, polite, but always looking down from some invisible height. People who thought money made you refined. People who didn't realize grace had nothing to do with gold. "If they want a poor mother," she said softly, stirring her tea, "I can be poorer than they expect." Her laughter, low and melodic, filled the room for a moment. Then she reached for her sewing kit. The gray dress had a missing button. She threaded a needle and fixed it, her hands steady and patient. She hummed while she worked. An old hymn she used to teach her students, something about mercy and courage. As the last note faded, she looked down at her work. The button wasn't perfectly aligned, but it held firm. "Good enough," she whispered. "That's all I've ever been, good enough." The next morning, the light came early through the lace curtains. Evelyn woke before dawn like she always did. She made a pot of coffee, toasted some bread, and looked again at the dress hanging by the window. The gray looked almost silver now in the morning sun. She touched the fabric and smiled. Then she reached for a small silver necklace, the gift from her students years ago, and placed it on the dresser beside the dress. "The little shine," she murmured, "just so they don't think I'm completely invisible." Her phone pinged again, another message from David. "Dinner's at 7. I'll pick you up at 6:30. Love you, Mom." She typed back, "I'll be ready, sweetheart." But when she set the phone down, the smile on her face slowly faded. She turned to her piano, sat on the creaky bench, and let her fingers drift over the keys. She didn't play anything complicated. Just a simple melody her husband had written long ago. Something that reminded her of the life they'd built. Quiet, imperfect, but whole. As the notes filled the air, she whispered, "Forgettable. Perfect." She closed her eyes and kept playing, the melody soft and steady, like the sound of someone who knows her worth, even when others can't see it. The rain had just started when Evelyn stepped out of the car. Not the kind that came in a rush, but the slow, polite drizzle that Savannah was famous for, warm enough to feel alive, soft enough to forgive. She clutched her faded canvas bag close as the valet rushed over, umbrella in hand. "Evenin', ma'am," he said, a little surprised by how little she carried. "Evenin', sweetheart," she replied, voice gentle but sure. "Don't worry about me. I've walked through worse weather than this." Inside, the restaurant glowed like another world. Crystal chandeliers spilled gold light across white tablecloths, and the air hummed with quiet violins. The kind of place where waiters didn't walk, they glided. Evelyn paused for a second, watching a couple laugh over wine, then fixed her cardigan and kept walking. She spotted David at a table near the center, already standing, waving her over. He looked good, nervous but good. Isabella sat beside him, radiant in a dress that probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly pension. And across from them the Davenports. Tall, polished, their posture so straight it made the air feel stiff. "Good evening," Evelyn said softly, placing her bag beside her chair. Mrs. Davenport smiled. The polite, tight-lipped smile that said more than words ever could. Her eyes swept over Evelyn's gray dress, the tiny pull in the fabric near the hem. "What a humble choice of outfit," she said, tone syrupy sweet. "Must be comfortable." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "Oh, it is. I've had it longer than I've had some friends. It's held up better, too." David shifted in his seat. "Mom," he whispered under his breath, a quiet warning. But Evelyn wasn't offended. She just took a sip of water and glanced at the rain streaking down the big windows. The lights outside shimmered through it, turning the city into soft watercolor. The waiter approached. Would you care for some wine this evening? Mrs. Davenport lifted her glass. We'll have the Chateau Margaux 2005. Evelyn chuckled. You could have just said red wine, darling. He'd have figured it out. Mr. Davenport leaned forward, smiling in that way rich men often do, warm but a little performative. So, Evelyn, David tells us you were a teacher? 35 years, she said proudly. Music. I taught everything from scales to patience. How lovely, he said, as if lovely was a word you use for something distant. That must have been fulfilling even without the paycheck. Oh, it paid enough, she said lightly. Not in dollars, maybe. But the world's got other currencies. The quiet chuckle slipped out of David, but Isabella's hand found his under the table, the gentle reminder to behave. The waiter brought their food. Scallops, duck confit, and something Evelyn couldn't pronounce but smelled like butter and decisions. The conversation flowed easily, for everyone else at least. The Davenports talked about their lake house in Vermont, their art collection, the recent exhibit in New York. Evelyn listened, smiling faintly, occasionally nodding. You'd love it, Mrs. Davenport said, swirling her wine. The pieces are so bold, so modern. It's real culture. Evelyn tilted her head. Culture's a funny word. Folks say it like it belongs to certain people. But I've heard a kid with a beat-up guitar play something that'd humble any museum. Mrs. Davenport blinked, not sure if it was meant as a compliment or correction. She took another sip of wine instead of answering. The jazz band in the corner began a slow tune. Something with a heartbeat, a rhythm that felt like the South. Evelyn's eyes softened. That's Duke Ellington, she whispered. My husband used to play that when the storm hit. Said the rain always kept the best time. The others kept talking, but she wasn't really listening anymore. She was hearing the music, the soft brushes on drums, the low hum of the bass. For a moment she was back in her old living room, Henry tapping his foot, their son laughing as she sang. That kind of memory you didn't chase. It just arrived and made itself at home. When she looked up again, Mrs. Davenport was watching her. You seem lost in thought, she said, smiling like she was humoring a child. Just remembering something kind, Evelyn said. It's rare company these days. There was a pause, long enough to make David glance nervously between them. He tried to fill the silence. Mom used to host community lessons. People would bring their kids who couldn't afford lessons anywhere else. Mrs. Davenport nodded politely, slicing her duck. That's charitable. Not charity, Evelyn corrected, still smiling. Just community. There's a difference. The air at the table shifted again. Not heavy, not angry, just a little less certain. The waiter came back with dessert menus, and everyone pretended to read them. Outside, thunder rolled low and soft like a drumline warming up. Evelyn reached for her tea, the steam curling around her fingers. She looked at the gold rim of the china cup, then at the people sitting across from her, so composed, so rehearsed. She thought about how strange it was, this dance of pretending to be small so others could feel big, pretending to be impressed so no one felt insecure. David caught her gaze, a silent apology flickering in his eyes. She gave him the smallest smile back. No blame, just understanding. The jazz band finished the song, and the restaurant burst into polite applause. Evelyn tapped her fingers on the table to the rhythm, soft but steady. When she looked around again, she thought about how they all seemed so proud of their taste, their art, their talk of beauty. And yet, not one of them had said a single word about kindness. As the rain thickened against the windows, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her smile returning, gentle, knowing, untouched. They talked about art, she thought, but not once about kindness. Mrs. Davenport's knife made a soft scrape against her plate as she cut another piece of duck. Then, with that same polite tone people use when they're about to judge you, she asked, "And what do you do, Evelyn?" Evelyn smiled faintly, folding her napkin just to have something to do with her hands. Teach or used to. Music mostly. Oh, Mrs. Davenport said, her eyebrows rising just enough to register surprise. Then came the smile, tight, elegant and sharp. That explains the simple taste. David's fork stopped midair. Isabella's eyes darted to her mother, then down to her plate. For a moment nobody said anything. You could almost hear the violin player in the corner hit a wrong note. Evelyn's lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. Simple things are easier to keep in tune, she said softly. Mrs. Davenport gave a small laugh, the kind that wasn't really laughter at all. Oh, of course, of course. Simplicity has its charm. The conversation limped forward, everyone pretending not to feel the weight that had settled at the table. David looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find words polite enough to bridge the space between embarrassment and loyalty. Evelyn spared him the effort. She reached for her glass of water, calm and steady, her reflection rippling in the surface. The few minutes passed, filled with the soft clinking of silverware and the quiet hum of conversation from other tables. Outside, the rain kept falling, tapping gently on the tall windows. The jazz band shifted to a slower tune, low trumpet, brush drums, the kind of rhythm that felt like breathing. Then Mrs. Davenport leaned forward. Her voice dipped in honey but cold underneath. If it's hard living alone, dear, we could help, she said, tilting her head. The small allowance, say $700 a month? Just to make things easier. David's head jerked up. Mother. She raised a manicured hand. It's just kindness, darling. We take care of family, that's all. The air thickened. Even the waiter approaching with refills hesitated and backed away quietly. Evelyn didn't move right away. She looked at Mrs. Davenport for a long moment, her gaze soft, not sharp. Then she said, "How kind. You'd pay me to stay invisible." Mrs. Davenport blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Invisible? Yes, Evelyn said, still calm. That's what money does sometimes. Makes people disappear when they don't fit the picture. David's voice was barely above a whisper. Mom. She turned to him and smiled, a real one this time. It's all right, sweetheart. I'm fine. Her tone was light, but her eyes, those deep, patient eyes, carried the kind of hurt that doesn't spill over. It just sinks. For a few seconds no one spoke. The sound of the rain filled the silence like a song that knew too much. Isabella reached for her water, her hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Davenport coughed gently and tried to recover. Well, I didn't mean anything by it. We simply believe in helping where we can. Evelyn nodded. That's a lovely belief. Just make sure it doesn't sound like charity when it's really pride trying to look polite. The older woman's face stiffened. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her voice gentle again. You know, in music we have a saying. If you play too loudly, no one hears the melody. Sometimes kindness is like that. Too loud to be kind. No anger. No raised voice. Just the kind of truth that lands quietly and stays. David couldn't look at anyone. Isabella whispered Mrs. Davenport meant well, but even she didn't sound convinced. Evelyn placed her napkin neatly on the table and smiled toward the waiter, who quickly came by to pour her more water. Thank you, sweetheart, she said, and the warmth in her tone, so genuine, so ordinary, sounded louder than all the polished voices around her. For the rest of the meal she said little. She let the others talk about their vacation homes and art galleries, nodding at the right times, her mind half a step away. There was no bitterness in her, only a quiet sadness mixed with something almost like pity. When dessert came, she watched the golden spoon dip into crème brûlée, listened to the crisp crack of caramel, and thought of her old students, children who shared sandwiches during lunch, who brought her flowers made from paper because they couldn't afford real ones. Those kids never made her feel small. The conversation drifted to stocks, exhibitions, and names Evelyn would never remember. Mrs. Davenport laughed too loudly at her husband's story, the kind of laugh that filled silence instead of joy. Evelyn glanced toward the window again. The reflection of the chandelier shimmered in the rain, and for a fleeting moment, She thought it looked like tears sliding down glass. They think they're being kind, she murmured almost to herself, but kindness doesn't cost $700 a month. David looked at her, his throat tight. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said enough. As the waiter cleared the plates, Mrs. Davenport finally spoke again, trying to smooth the air. It really is a blessing, isn't it? To have family. To share what we have. Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze steady. Yes, she said softly. But sharing isn't the same as showing off. The jazz band ended another tune. Applause rippled faintly through the room. Evelyn reached for her cup of tea, felt its warmth and smiled, peaceful, untouched. In her mind she thought, they believe they're giving charity. But all they're really revealing is poverty, just not the kind money can fix. Evelyn turned the stem of her wine glass slowly between her fingers, the candlelight catching the faint scratches on the glass. She hadn't touched a sip. Across the table, Mrs. Davenport was still talking, her tone airy, careless, about vacations, new property, about helping young couples start off right. Evelyn set the glass down gently, the sound soft but sharp enough to cut through the chatter. Tell me, Mrs. Davenport, she said, her voice calm, steady. How much did David's down payment cost you? The question landed like a note in a quiet room. Unexpected, echoing longer than it should have. Mrs. Davenport blinked. Excuse me? The house, Evelyn repeated. How much did you help with? There was a pause before she said $40,000. Evelyn nodded slowly. And the wedding? Mrs. Davenport hesitated, her posture tightening. 25. So, Evelyn said softly, $65,000 to buy obedience, and $700 a month to erase a mother. The table went silent. Even the jazz in the background seemed to lower its voice. David's fork slipped from his hand, clinking against his plate. He swallowed hard. Mom, please. She didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed on Mrs. Davenport, who had gone pale but tried to hold her smile like a mask starting to crack. Mrs. Davenport, Evelyn said gently, you strike me as someone who knows the price of everything, except people. Mrs. Davenport straightened in her chair. That's not fair. We were just trying to help, Evelyn finished. Yes, I know. But sometimes the way we help says more about what we think of someone than what we give them. The older woman's lips parted, searching for words. None came. Evelyn leaned back slightly, the candlelight catching the soft silver in her hair. Her voice dropped lower, like she was speaking to the room itself. You don't know what silence costs when it's raised with love. You've never had to bite your tongue so your child could keep his pride. You've never stayed small just to let someone else feel big. David closed his eyes. Isabella looked between them, frozen. The waiter passed by but quickly retreated again, sensing something fragile and private in the air. Evelyn reached for her napkin, smoothing it across her lap as if everything were perfectly normal. I suppose we come from different worlds, she said softly. In mine, love doesn't come with a receipt. Mrs. Davenport's voice wavered. You're twisting this into something cruel. I only meant to make sure my daughter and your son had stability. Evelyn smiled faintly. Stability's a fine thing. But it's funny how often that word is used when people really mean control. That struck something. Mrs. Davenport looked away, her fingers tightening around the base of her wine glass. Evelyn's tone softened again, her eyes kind now. You meant well, Mrs. Davenport. Just not kindly. It wasn't an insult. It was almost merciful. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside had grown heavier, the sound against the windows like soft applause for a truth no one wanted to admit. Evelyn looked over at David then, her expression unreadable but calm. Do you remember when you were little, sweetheart? And you tried to buy me a Mother's Day gift with the change you'd saved from mowing lawns? David nodded slowly, eyes glistening. You came home with a chipped vase, she said, smiling gently. You were so worried I'd think it wasn't enough. But you know what I saw? She looked back at Mrs. Davenport. I saw heart. I saw effort. Not value in numbers but value in meaning. Mrs. Davenport swallowed, her eyes flickering down to her untouched plate. Evelyn reached for her cup of tea, now lukewarm, and took a small sip. Money's a curious thing, she said. It makes some people generous and others blind. For a while, the only sound was the rain and the faint clinking of glass from another table. Then softly, Evelyn said what would stay with everyone long after that night. Respect doesn't need money. It needs manners. Her voice wasn't loud. Didn't have to be. It carried the kind of weight that came from truth spoken without anger. Like thunder too far away to frighten, but close enough to be heard. She pushed her chair back, slow and deliberate. The candle flame flickered from the movement. Mrs. Davenport didn't stop her. She just stared, eyes glossy, face flushed with something between shame and confusion. Evelyn smiled politely, the same way she had when she first walked in. Graceful, unshaken, perfectly herself. Then she stood, the rain still whispering against the glass, and said quietly as she gathered her bag, "You keep your money, dear. I'll keep my dignity." And for the first time that night, nobody at that golden table had a single thing left to say. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of rain against the windows and the soft clink of a spoon against porcelain. Evelyn sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression calm, almost too calm. Then she looked up, her voice low but clear. "You know, Mrs. Davenport, I worked 35 years teaching kids whose parents couldn't afford music lessons. I taught them to hear beauty even when they had nothing. Every paycheck I saved a little. Not for jewelry, not for vacations," she paused, glancing at David, "for his education. Every note I played built his future." The room went quiet. Even the jazz band seemed to sense it. The music fading into the background like it knew it wasn't needed anymore. Evelyn reached into her small, worn purse and pulled out a faded debit card. The edges were chipped, the name half rubbed off from years of use. She laid it gently on the white tablecloth. "This card built your house," she said softly. "The poor mother you pitied paid for your beginning." David's mouth opened, but no words came. His face flushed, not from shame alone but realization. Isabella's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Mrs. Davenport blinked fast, as if trying to process what she'd just heard. "That can't be," Evelyn said, still calm. "And it is." She smiled faintly, not in triumph but in quiet release. "Every mortgage payment, every tuition check, every little thing you thought came from generosity, it came from work you never bothered to ask about." Mrs. Davenport sat straighter, her chin trembling just slightly. "Well," she stammered, "that's admirable." Evelyn tilted her head. "No, dear. It's not admirable. It's just love doing what love does." The waiter appeared beside them then, clearing plates with the careful grace of someone who'd been trained to read tension. "Shall I bring the check?" Mrs. Davenport reached for her card immediately, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Of course. Allow me." The waiter took it, disappeared, and for a few long seconds silence reigned again. Evelyn looked down at the small candle between them. The flame trembled slightly in the air-conditioned room, fighting to stay alive. When the waiter returned, he looked uncertain. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It seems your card didn't go through." Mrs. Davenport's eyes widened. "That's impossible. Try again." He nodded politely, left and came back moments later. "I did, ma'am. I'm afraid it's been declined." Mr. Davenport cleared his throat, embarrassed. "There must be some mistake." Evelyn raised a hand gently. "Don't worry. I've already covered it." The waiter hesitated. "Yes, ma'am, everything's settled." Mrs. Davenport turned to her, flustered. "That's not necessary." Evelyn smiled softly. "Neither was your offer of $700. No one spoke. The weight of it lingered, heavy and still. Evelyn reached again into her purse and placed something else on the table, an old wooden rosary, smooth from years of touch. She set it next to her teacup, fingers brushing it like an old friend. My husband gave me this the year before he passed, she said quietly. He always said grace was the only inheritance worth leaving. Her words weren't bitter. They floated out like music, gentle but certain. The kind that fills a space without trying to dominate it. David's eyes shimmered. Mom, he whispered. She looked at him, her smile tender. It's all right, sweetheart. We don't measure love in dollars, remember? We measure it in what we're willing to give up. Isabella reached out, almost on instinct, and placed her hand over Evelyn's. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first honest one all night. Evelyn didn't pull away. She simply nodded, eyes softening. The waiter came by once more to clear the table. Will there be anything else tonight? Evelyn shook her head. No, thank you. I think we've all had enough. She stood slowly, her chair sliding back with a faint creak. The candle flickered again as if bowing to her, its light stretching across the empty plates and untouched dessert. Mrs. Davenport watched her rise, her lips parted but no words forming. She looked smaller somehow, like the glitter around her had dimmed, leaving something human beneath it. Evelyn picked up her purse, slipped the rosary inside and turned toward the door. Before she left, she looked back once more, her tone gentle, almost kind. Power didn't move tonight, she said. Perspective did. And then she walked away, slow, steady, each step sounding like a quiet lesson the room would remember long after she was gone. The rain had calmed to a drizzle by the time Evelyn stepped out of the restaurant. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, bending and blurring in the puddles. She stood under the awning for a moment, breathing in the cool air, letting the tension slide off her shoulders one quiet breath at a time. Then a yellow cab pulled up, its headlights cutting through the mist. Need a ride, ma'am? The driver called out. Evelyn smiled faintly and nodded. Yes, please. The door creaked as she climbed in. The seat smelled faintly of lavender and old leather. The small gospel song hummed through the radio, soft and warm, like someone whispering forgiveness into the night. The driver was a woman, maybe in her late 60s, with gray braids tucked under a knitted cap. Her eyes caught Evelyn's in the rearview mirror. Pard night, ma'am? Evelyn let out a small laugh, more air than sound. Just one that played the truth too loud. The driver chuckled, nodding knowingly. My mama used to say, some music ain't meant for everyone to dance to. Evelyn smiled at that, her fingers brushing against the rosary in her purse. Your mama sounds like a wise woman. She was, the driver said. Didn't have much schooling, but she could read people like scripture. They drove in silence for a while. The windshield wipers kept a steady rhythm, and outside, the city glowed in streaks of orange and blue. The streetlights blurred into soft halos, like the world itself had softened after holding its breath too long. Evelyn leaned her head back, watching the reflections move across the window. You know, she said quietly, people like to talk about kindness like it's this shiny thing. But real kindness, it's quieter. Doesn't show off. Doesn't expect applause. The driver hummed in agreement. Hum. Real kindness don't care if anybody's watching. That's why folks miss it. Evelyn nodded slowly. I think I saw that tonight. Or maybe I saw what happens when people forget it. The driver glanced at her again, her expression gentle. You handled yourself real calm, though. Most folks would have yelled, slammed a door or something. I used to think that's what strength looked like, Evelyn said. But sometimes silence hits harder. The driver grinned. Now that's something my mama would have said. They both laughed quietly. It wasn't loud or long. Just the kind of laughter that lets the air breathe again. The cab turned onto the bridge. The river below shimmered like melted glass, carrying the reflections of the city lights downstream. Evelyn looked out at it and whispered, funny thing about water. It forgives everything that falls into it. The driver raised an eyebrow. You sound like a teacher. I was, Evelyn said softly. Music. Ah, then you know how to listen better than most. Evelyn smiled. Maybe that's all I did tonight, listen. Not just to them but to myself. Did you like what you heard? She thought about that for a second, then shook her head gently. Not everything, but enough to keep the peace. The driver nodded. Peace is a good thing to keep. They stopped at a red light. The rain started again, soft and steady, tapping against the roof like an old song coming back. Evelyn reached for her rosary, feeling the smooth beads slide between her fingers. He always said grace was the only inheritance worth leaving, she murmured, mostly to herself. Your husband? The driver asked. Yes, Evelyn said. He believed you can't own love, you can only pass it on. The light turned green, and the cab rolled forward. The glow from the dashboard painted Evelyn's face in soft amber. She looked out at the street, at strangers hurrying under umbrellas, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, lightness. When they reached her street, she asked the driver to stop a block early. I like to walk the last bit, she said. Helps me think. The driver smiled. Thinking's cheaper than therapy. Evelyn laughed, a real laugh this time. Ain't that the truth? She handed over a few bills, more than the fare, and said, keep the change. For your mama's wisdom. The driver's eyes softened. Thank you, ma'am. You have a good night now. Evelyn stepped out into the drizzle. The air smelled of wet earth and magnolia. She pulled her shawl tighter and started walking, her shoes tapping softly on the damp sidewalk. Each step felt lighter than the one before. When she reached her gate, she paused, looking up at the faint moon breaking through the clouds. The world was quiet, and for once so was her heart. She touched the rosary again, the cool beads resting against her palm. For the first time she whispered, I wasn't angry. I was free. Morning light spilled through the lace curtains, soft and golden, touching everything like an apology. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the kettle. Evelyn moved slowly through the kitchen, still in her robe, the kind with the frayed sleeves she never threw away. The smell of coffee filled the room, warm and familiar, grounding. The knock came at the door, hesitant, like someone unsure if they were welcome. She set her cup down and opened it. David stood there holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, the kind you pick yourself because you don't know what else to do. His eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep but from thinking too much. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. "Hey, sweetheart," she replied, a gentle smile playing at her lips. "You're up early." He stepped inside, wiping his shoes on the mat out of habit. Couldn't really sleep. He looked around the house at the same framed photos, the piano, the plants by the window. "Feels smaller than I remember," he said. Evelyn chuckled. "That's because you've gotten bigger, not the house." He didn't laugh. His throat tightened as he handed her the flowers. "I was wrong last night," he said. "I let them talk down to you. I didn't stop it." She took the flowers carefully, arranging them in an old mason jar. "You didn't let them, son," she said quietly. "You just forgot who taught you grace." David's eyes glistened. "I just wanted to keep the peace, you know? I thought if I stayed quiet things would stay calm." Evelyn nodded, filling the jar with water. "There's a kind of peace that comes from silence," she said, "and another kind that only comes after you speak up. You'll learn which is which." He sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his hands clasped together. "I saw their faces when you left. They didn't know what to do. I didn't either." Evelyn sat across from him, pouring another cup of coffee and sliding it toward him. "You did fine, baby. We all stumble. What matters is how we stand back up." He gave a shaky laugh. "You're still teaching, huh?" "Some habits die hard," she smiled. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text. She reached for it, squinting slightly without her reading glasses. It was from Isabella. She read it silently, her expression softening. "Who's it from?" David asked. "Your wife," she said, handing him the phone. He took it, reading aloud. "Your mother reminded me of mine before money changed her." He looked up, speechless. Evelyn leaned back, folding her arms loosely. "She's a good girl, David. Just learning to see again." He nodded, his jaw tightening. They've got this way of making everything sound small, you know? Like worth only exists if it's expensive. Evelyn smiled gently. That's because they've never built something with their own hands. They don't know what earn feels like. David looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, he saw not just his mother but the life that had shaped her. The patience in her eyes, the calluses on her fingers, the steady quiet that no humiliation could touch. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Evelyn reached across the table, laying her hand over his. You don't have to deserve love, sweetheart. You just have to remember it. They sat there in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need filling. Outside, a bird chirped from the magnolia tree, the air carrying that faint smell of wet earth from the night's rain. David broke the quiet first. Are you mad at me? She thought for a moment, then shook her head. No. Anger's a heavy thing to carry, and I've got enough groceries in life without adding that to my cart. He smiled finally, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. You always find a way to make everything sound simple. It's not simple, she said. It's just clear. He stood, walking around the small kitchen, touching the old piano bench as he passed. You still play? Every morning, she said. Keeps me steady. He nodded. I remember sitting right there while you practiced. I fall asleep on the floor. You drooled on the carpet, she teased. He laughed, a real laugh this time, and wiped his eyes. I did, didn't I? Evelyn reached up to fix his collar, the way mothers do no matter how old their sons get. You've got your father's stubbornness, but you've got my heart, she said softly. Use it better than I did. He looked down at her, his voice breaking. You did everything right, Mom. She smiled, shaking her head. No one does everything right. But I tried to keep my love honest. That's all a mother can do. He hugged her then, tight and long like a boy again. When they finally pulled apart, she handed him the flowers back. Take these home, she said. Put them somewhere she can see them. They'll remind her of color. He nodded, holding them like something fragile. I'll tell her you forgave us. Evelyn's smile softened. I didn't have to. Forgiveness was already in the doing. He kissed her cheek and stepped toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back once more. She was standing by the window, sunlight wrapping around her like quiet armor. He said, You really are something else, Mom. And she answered with that calm that had carried her through every storm. Pride bends easily, son. Love stands firm. The door closed gently behind him, and the house, once silent, felt full again. It had been a week since that dinner, the one everyone in the family pretended hadn't happened. Evelyn's days had fallen back into rhythm. Morning coffee, a walk by the magnolia trees, music drifting softly through the open windows. She thought the storm had passed, until she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, Isabella stood there, clutching a small pie dish wrapped in a towel. Gone were the pearls, the perfect hair, the carefully curated smile. She looked real, human. I hope I'm not intruding, Isabella said, her voice quiet but steady. I made something. It's not perfect, but I wanted to try. Evelyn stepped aside, smiling just enough to let her in. Come on in, honey. Nobody ever healed standing on the porch. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and cinnamon. Isabella placed the pie on the counter, peeling back the towel. Apple pie, she said, a little embarrassed. I wanted to learn your recipe. For humility. Evelyn let out a soft laugh, the kind that warmed a room. It takes time, she said, pulling 2 plates from the cupboard. And a bit of burnt crust. They both laughed then, awkwardly at first, then easier. Evelyn sliced the pie, handing Isabella a fork. Looks good to me. It's too sweet, Isabella admitted, taking a bite. Then you're already learning, Evelyn said. Life's the same way. You try to make it perfect and you forget it's meant to be shared, not judged. They ate quietly for a while, the sound of rain starting up again outside. Isabella looked around the small kitchen, the piano in the corner, the chipped mug by the sink, the photos of David growing up. He told me you worked 3 jobs once, she said softly. Hum. And I still came home and made dinner. Kids don't remember what you bought them, but they never forget who showed up. Isabella looked down at her plate. I don't think I've shown up for anyone in a long time. Evelyn reached over, touching her hand gently. You're here now. That's what counts. For a moment neither spoke. The rain grew heavier, tapping against the window in a soft rhythm. Isabella broke the silence first. I think I was scared, she said. Scared of being small. My whole life, my mother made me believe money was the only kind of strength that mattered. Evelyn nodded, her tone kind but honest. That's the cruelest kind of fear. Thinking love has to prove itself with receipts. Isabella's eyes welled up. I saw how they talked to you, and I didn't stop them. I just froze. Evelyn smiled gently. Honey, sometimes silence isn't cowardice. It's confusion. You were hearing two songs at once, one from your mama, one from your heart. Takes a while to know which one to dance to. Isabella laughed through her tears. You really do speak like a music teacher. Old habits, Evelyn said, sipping her coffee. But music's just truth with rhythm, isn't it? We all play the same notes, some of us just forget the tempo. They talked for hours about childhood, about loss, about how pride can sneak into love and make it hard to breathe. At one point, Evelyn pulled out an old recipe card, the edges worn. Here, she said, handing it over. If you really want to learn, start with this one. It's not just pie, it's patience written in butter. Isabella took the card like it was something sacred. You're really forgiving me? Evelyn smiled. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's a weight you set down so you can walk home lighter. The rain eased into a soft drizzle. The air smelled of cinnamon, sugar, and something new, peace. As Isabella got ready to leave, she turned back at the door. You know, I thought last week was the worst night of my life, she said. Now I think it was the best. Because it brought me here. Evelyn touched her shoulder lightly. Then it did its job. They stood there for a heartbeat. Two women who had once been strangers, now connected by something much quieter than apology. Understanding. As the door closed gently behind Isabella, Evelyn looked down at the table. Two empty plates, a half-eaten pie, crumbs scattered like little remnants of truth. She smiled to herself, whispering the words that seemed to fit the moment best. Two women once divided by pride, now stirred by truth. The house was quiet that Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet that feels full instead of empty. Sunlight drifted through the lace curtains, laying soft gold across the old piano by the window. Evelyn sat there with her rosary in hand, the beads warm from her touch. She wasn't really praying, just thinking, letting the rhythm of each beat guide her thoughts like small, steady breaths. Outside, a breeze moved through the magnolia trees, their leaves whispering against the window. The air smelled faintly of rain and something sweet from a neighbor's kitchen. Evelyn smiled. It was the kind of day you didn't rush through, you just let it be. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She picked it up, squinting at the screen. The message from David. We love you, Mom. Dinner's at our place tonight. You don't need to bring anything but yourself. She stared at the words for a moment, and her lips curved into a slow, quiet smile. Not a grand moment, not some cinematic ending. Just simple, soft truth. Sometimes love doesn't come back with apologies. Comes back with invitations. She set the phone down and looked out the window again. The world outside seemed a little brighter now, like even the light had learned to speak gently. Her gaze fell on the piano. The wood had dulled over the years, but when she lifted the lid, the keys still gleamed in that uneven way age gives things. Imperfect but beautiful. She pressed one note, then another. The sound filled the room, delicate but sure, like it knew exactly how much space to take up. Her voice, low and thoughtful, carried through the stillness. I used to think silence was weakness, she murmured. That keeping peace meant giving up. But I know better now. Silence isn't surrender. It's strength choosing its moment. She paused, letting that truth settle. It wasn't bitterness she felt anymore. It was peace, the kind that takes its time. the kind you earn after walking through too many storms. The afternoon light shifted, pouring across the piano and spilling over her hands. The rosary in her palm caught the glow, its beads flashing like tiny sparks of forgiveness. Evelyn turned it slowly one last time and whispered a soft prayer, not for herself, but for everyone she'd met along the way who hadn't learned yet that kindness could be quiet. The piano's melody continued, unhurried. Outside, a car drove by, children laughed in the distance, and somewhere a church bell rang. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened, not to the sound but to the space between the notes. That's where truth lived. That's where peace began. The sun dipped lower, brushing her cheek with light. She smiled, her hand resting gently on the rosary. The beads shimmered once more in the glow, bright, tender, alive, like a small piece of grace finding its way home. For a long time she just sat there, bathed in the Sunday light, her music blending with the quiet. And in that moment the world didn't need to apologize, just needed to listen. Kindness isn't loud. It doesn't ask for attention or chase applause. It lives in the small things, how you listen, how you forgive, how you keep loving even when no one's watching. That's the kind of strength people don't write about, but it's the kind that holds the world together. If you've ever been judged for being too quiet, too humble, too simple, remember this. The loudest hearts aren't always the ones that make the most noise. Sometimes the quiet ones change everything, one act of grace at a time. We live in a world that celebrates pride, power, and being right. But kindness, real kindness, doesn't compete. It doesn't need to win. Just stays. It outlives the anger. It outlasts the shame. You see, pride fades when the crowd walks away. But kindness? It echoes. It stays in the people you've touched, the ones who'll never forget the way you made them feel safe, seen, or loved. So if this story found you tonight, maybe it's because life's been asking you to slow down, to listen again, to that part of you that still believes goodness matters. Take a deep breath. Let it remind you that dignity doesn't need proof. Grace doesn't ask permission. And silence, when it comes from love, isn't weakness. It's wisdom choosing peace. Maybe you've lived through your own version of this story. Maybe someone once looked at you and saw less than what you were. But you stayed kind anyway. You forgave when you didn't have to. You stood quietly and somehow you still won. If that's you, I want to hear from you. Tell me your story. Tell me about the moment you realized that being gentle doesn't mean being small. Tell me where you're listening from, your kitchen, your car, your little corner of the world. Because stories like yours remind people like me that goodness still has a home. You don't have to write something perfect. Just speak from the heart. Someone out there might need to hear what you've already lived through.